And welcome to this edition of Hidden History, Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host, Ray Smith. Ray, good to see you.
Hello. Hey, Keith. Good to see you.
You know, before we introduce our guest today, right before we recorded this, I just want to take a moment and mention that I just saw that Alex Trebek had passed away from the host of Jeopardy! And I know over the years there's been a number of questions about Oak Ridge on Jeopardy! So thanks to Alex Trebek for letting the world know a little bit about Oak Ridge. So, but I just wanted to, I just found that out maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago. So just my tribute to Alex Trebek and Ray, why don't you, and speaking of history, why don't you introduce our guest today?
All right, I'll be glad to. Like you, I did note all of those Oak Ridge references that we could get on national TV and appreciated that. But today we have with us David Hackett. David's a good friend. He is the reason that when I am making presentations on the history of Oak Ridge, when I go to the prehistory portion, I will always mention that this area was not occupied, right in this area around the Clinch River, not occupied by the Cherokee Indians when the white settlers came here, but by the Yuchi Indians. And he's a descendant of the Yuchi Indian tribe, I believe. And he is going to focus today on the prehistory, what happened in this area before the Manhattan Project. Now, let me make you aware that not only can he talk about the white settlers coming into this area, but he can also talk about the prehistory of even that history that can go all the way back to some geological history. So we're going to have some fun today looking at parts of history that we don't normally think a lot about when we're thinking about Oak Ridge and the Manhattan Project. But this place was here a long time before Oak Ridge. So enough from me. David, you go ahead and start and take it from here and wherever you'd like to go for us, okay?
Well, my real interest in history is the very deep, deep history, including things like this right here, which was one of the earliest residents of the Oak Ridge area. This is Eo Monoracus Shawnee, a trilobite, about 500 million years old. This was found near the Bull Run steam plant and represents a whole fauna of marine life that lived here millions of years ago. I'm also...
I said that is something else. And you found that near the Bull Run steam plant. You didn't have to go digging in any strange places. Was it a road cut?
Actually, it was land owned by Weigel at the time, and he was allowing people to clear it by hauling away fill for whatever purposes they needed. And so it said free dirt, and we came in and got our free dirt. We've sort of raced with the bulldozers as the bulldozers hauled off more fossils than we found. But we found a starfish, we found a whole ecology of Ordovician creatures, probably some of the best views of mid-Ordovician here in Tennessee that anybody's had in East Tennessee.
That's amazing.
And while that's probably my first love, my second love, of course, is the indigenous people that were here before European settlement. And I've spent quite a bit of time lately looking at the clash of culture period, collision of cultures, about 1790 period here in East Tennessee, because there's one gentleman named John Hackett who is undoubtedly a relative of mine, probably the fifth great grandfather or fifth great uncle. He was assigned by the federal government to dole out lands as land grant for service in the Revolutionary War. And so much of the lands that were handed out here in East Tennessee were given to Civil War veterans, or Revolutionary War veterans,
Mm-hmm.
and they either set up shop on the land and raise crops, or they sold it to somebody else, and that somebody else was often John Hackett, who was a land speculator on the side. Sort of a mild conflict of interest, probably, but not something they worried about back in those days. In fact, he had almost 40,000 acres of East Tennessee land and some 50 grants, land grants.
Now, was that all in this, was all of his in this area, or was it kind of spread around?
He had some over in Middle Tennessee too, but when he first came here, he came here out of the Revolutionary War himself. He enlisted in 1777. The oral tradition is that his wife died. He transferred his children to his brother, and he signed up for the Revolutionary War. He signed up a second time and was wounded in 1779 and transferred to the Invalid Corps here in East Tennessee. That was up in the Watauga settlement. He was up there for several years, and then he moved down to North Knox County in Corryton. And there was a log cabin there that he had called Hackett Station on the Emory Road. And so he lived out of there for a long time, but because of the thousands of surveys he did, he must have lived in the boonies most of the time and just come back to Hackett Station. He undoubtedly had a good rapport with the indigenous people, mainly the Chickamauga. Some people would argue the Chickamauga were Cherokee. They certainly weren't Iroquoian peoples. They were basically an amalgam of people, an agglomeration of peoples that included the Yuchi, the Cosati, the Shawnee, the Lenape, some Siouan peoples. It was just a potpourri, but at the same time, the Cherokee are not all Iroquoian. About a third of the Eastern Cherokee over here have deep Catawba ancestry. And so the tribes we know today aren't the tribes that we first found here when settlement started.
What about, go ahead, right?
One of the things that I would add to the Chickamauga story that you had is the history of dragging canoe. He was a leader of, if not the main leader, of the Chickamauga. And he did bring people in to that group from several tribes. He was the cousin of Nancy Ward. And Nancy Ward, of course, is a Cherokee Indian that tried to live at peace with the white settlers. And she actually attended all of the treaty negotiations. But Dragging Canoe said, you got to kill them. You just can't live with them. Mm-hmm. And she said, there's too many of them. In fact, he tried for 17 years. He died in 1994 after dancing all night for a raiding party. And what he would do, he would dance all night with all of these groups, and they would be ready. All of the raiders would go the next morning, and on at least one occasion, maybe more, Nancy Ward learned, because she would make she was the war woman, she would make the black drink that they drank. And she would learn where they were going. And she'd send a runner to warn the white settlers who was coming. She did that in the Watauga settlement, where you mentioned that John Hackett was, or at least was stationed there at a station. But she sent them and told them to get in their stockade, dragging canoes coming, and actually saved that settlement. There's a lot more we can go into about Nancy Ward and the statue that was lost. I've mentioned to you, Keith, that was stolen. I found that statue, by the way. It's now back in Tennessee, and I'm hoping to get it over into Knoxville. It's a statue, David, if I hadn't mentioned it to you, of Nancy Ward, stands about 4 foot tall. and it spent 70 years on a white woman's grave up in Granger County. But dragging canoe is a connection to the Chickamauga that I wanted to make at this time.
I would point out that neither Nancy Ward or Dragging Canoe had any Iroquoian blood of the Cherokee. They were all of mixed heritage, just like most of the Chickamauga. Dragging Canoe indeed was a very warlike. He did not want white settlement. That's why I would stress the difference between the Cherokee, who signed away most of Tennessee, land they really didn't possess because it was only their hunting grounds. The Chickamauga did possess it, and they were very, very militant about not giving up their land. And of course, John Hackett was coming in, giving it out for the federal government. It was already being given out by North Carolina. I think some 24 land grants that John Hackett had and signed up for as grants came from North Carolina, not the federal government. This was known as the Southwest Territories at the time, or Washington County, North Carolina. And so it had been declared taboo for any settlers to come here the whole time the British colonies existed. But as soon as we declared our independence, people started flowing in to East Tennessee because it was prime land. I've just posted on the Oak Ridge History Museum Facebook page, group page, and on the Oak Ridge Science and Heritage page, also on the Friends of the Emory Road page, a post on John Hackett with a nice map called the Goodspeed map. I think I got a view of it here. And it's hard to see, of course, in this, but there's one posted. It shows White's Fort in Knoxville. It shows Cavett Station. It shows Hackett Station. It shows Pawpaw Town, which was still here at this time. Pawpaw Town was a Chickamauga village. It was located here in Oak Ridge, right near where the White Wing Bridge crosses into Oak Ridge from Loudoun County. Pawpaw Town existed right up to about 1800 when the Chickamauga pulled out of East Tennessee up into Kingston and Rockwood areas. One of John Hackett's big claims to fame as a settler here is that he and Little Page Sims and James Glasgow formed a treaty with Tullantesky for the Rockwood area that now has the pass that the Walton Road goes through, the Walton Road being a part of the Emery Road system. And so
now, if you don't mind, let me take you on a little side trip and ask you to talk about the Emory Road. I know you and I share a great interest in that. And of course, there's a historical marker right there near the Oak Ridge History Museum and the bridge that's there. So tell us a little about your involvement in helping to recognize and your hopes for the heritage trail that you're trying to get recognized.
Again, the Emory Road, my interest there was sparked by both Tullantesky and John Hackett. John Hackett moved down the Emory Road as he surveyed the lands, and ultimately he moved down to Fort Southwest Point, which was a fort built for the Walton Road route of the system. He actually owned that land and the land Kingston's on, and in the Tennessee archives is a court case where he was suing for compensation for the land that the fort and the city sit on. There's no resolution to it. It would appear from that he settled out of court for the loss of the land. But he did indeed move up and down the Emory Road because it was the only road in Tennessee really at that time. The Emory Road is sort of a loosely defined system of roads. Originally, the Emory Road is a road that went from Philadelphia to Nashville, or Nashboro as it was called at that time. And it's the road that Davy Crockett and Andrew Jackson traveled up and down between here and Washington later, after Philadelphia ceased to be the capital. But the Emery Road was originally laid down along Talentiski's Trail, which was one of the many Indian trails. And those Indian trails weren't made by the Indians, but they were made by the megabeasts of the Pleistocene, the mammoths and mastodons, as they migrated from the ice front down to the Gulf. These creatures were herbivores, and herbivores have to have salt in their diet, because without it, there's not enough salt in plants to survive, for a mammal to survive, and so they have to seek out salt. And so all these trails led from Salt Lick to Salt Lick. Nashville, of course, was French Lick. The salt licks on the Emory Road here include Saltville in Virginia, and then Oliver Springs, which was known as Winter Springs first. And there's a large Indian salt making operation called the Davis Nose Site, archaeological site, there in Oliver Springs. The next one down was Ray Springs. Ray Springs was the big spring in Ray County, and it's now under Watts Bar Lake. But these salt springs were originally the sites that animals gathered at. So the first hunters that came into North America would go to these sites to hunt these animals for food. Later on, as agrarian culture set in and people were raising corn instead of hunting animals as much, then these sites became necessary for them because they were eating corn, eating a lot more herbs as opposed to meat in their diet. And so they had to have salt. And so one of the things the Uchis did, being one of the first people here, and they weren't the first because the Lenape were here before them, excuse me. And so one of the things the Uchis did to secure their importance in the cultures here was to seize all the salt licks and manufacture salt and trade it up and down the trails. So they were the primary traders that were operating the economy for the indigenous people. They also seized the theology of the time and created a theocracy. And so the Yuchi become, even though they were not a real large tribe, they become a very powerful tribe by controlling the trade and the religion.
Hey, David, why don't you tell me about the Emory Road as it comes through Anderson County. Can you point out specific spots that people might recognize today?
Sure. The Emory Road first takes off of the great Indian path coming into Tennessee and going down through the valley. Takes off at Blaine. Okay. 411 would be the great Indian path. And takes off at Blaine and curves around to through Corrington into Halls, and from Halls it comes down into Carnes along what's still known as the Emery Road, although they spell it with an O now. And then it passes over the ridge out of Carnes, and it came down Henderson Road there out of Carnes into where the Bull Run steam plant sits now. And of course, the David Hall cabin is right there, and there's a portion of the old Emery Road still visible passing by the David Hall cabin. It passes up under the big ash pile that TVA has created there. And then it crossed over Edgemore Road and came down what is known as Old Emery Road, down by Jake Butcher's old place. And then it crossed the Clinch River, right where the marina is. In fact, there was a mound across the river from the marina there that had a beautiful fire pit destroyed back in the 30s by archaeologists. But it's was a Yuchi mound. Then the road crossing it.
That crossing, excuse me, David, that crossing was at Lee's Ford, is that right?
Lee's Ford, and it was Lee's farm where the mound is found across the river. It now is part of the property that the Wilds had across there. But then,
is any of that mound left? Is any of that mound left at all?
If you look in Google photographies, there's a big field, and in the side of the field there, the middle of the field really, there's a bunch of trees and a hole, and that's where the mound was.
Got it. That helps. All right, come on across the river now.
As it crossed the river at Lee's Ford, it came right up Emory Valley Road, hence the name there. And if you walk the greenways of Oak Ridge there, there's 1/8 of a mile of that greenway that passes down through the old Emory Road. It also passes along another 1/8 of a mile through the woods. But the Emory Valley Road destroyed most of the old Emory Road going through there. In the back, just next door to me, across the street actually, all the houses over there have the Emory Road going, the old Emory Road going up through them. There's a big ramp going up through the woods behind these houses. And so it passed down Emory Valley Road, which used to connect directly to the turnpike during the war. And it connected right there at Manhattan Place in front of the St. Mary's. And it then ran down the turnpike for a 1/2 a mile and left the turnpike and crossed the Stone Pillar Bridge. And then it went up and crossed, it took the route of Raleigh Road now, and then Hickory Place, and then it crossed onto what is Illinois Avenue now, basically, and went up and over the ridge and followed Highway 62 into Oliver Springs, through Winter's Gap, and then followed Highway 62 out through Wartburg, et cetera, to Monterey and on to Nashville.
Mm.
That's a very interesting roadway, and it was, if you notice along on maps, it pretty much had, although it crossed a couple of rivers, sure, but it pretty much had a dry route. And of course, the Walton Road, starting at Southwest Point, joined the Emery Road up at Monterey, or Standing Stone. There's still, there's still a little piece of that Standing Stone that's in Monterey. It's actually
part of a monument
down near the library. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
But that Emery Road was actually the earliest road cut and cleared through this area back, what, David,
1785. Peter Avery, allegedly, there's no record of Peter Avery doing it, but allegedly
this is going to
Peter
be
Avery
confusing.
did. Well, the best proof of that, of course, is it was called Avery's Trace at one point.
Yes, yeah.
Now, George Walton came along later and was commissioned. He was part of the militia force stationed at Fort Southwest Point, and he was commissioned to cut a new road because it was hard to keep the Indians from killing settlers on the Emory Road. So they set up these forts. The reason the settlers got killed was they refused to pay the Indian toll. It was an Indian road. The Indians demanded a toll. The treaty called for a toll, but many of the settlers didn't want to pay the toll. And so they paid the ultimate price for not paying the toll. Well, in order to stop this bloodshed, what they did is they set up a series of forts. The first one was Fort Adair. It was in Fountain City. So the travelers would come into Fort Adair and they'd pick up a militia group at Fort Adair. They'd go on to White's Fort where they'd get their supplies. Then they'd travel on down Kingston Pike, which is essentially Walton Road, to Fort Southwest Point in Kingston. There they would change out their militia guard and take a new set of militia onto Fort Blunt over near Nashville. Now, when they did this, they had to pay the militia to do this, and the militia took some of that pay and paid the Indian toll. So it solved the problem all the way around. They didn't have a choice not to pay the Indian toll.
One of the people that's a famous person that was actually killed during that time period is Bigfoot Spencer. And Bigfoot Spencer was ambushed at what's called Spencer's Rock now on Spencer Mountain. You can actually see this rock in the wintertime as you're coming on I-40 going west. As you're coming down off the ridge, Ozone Falls is back behind you. You pass it within 100 yards and don't know it. But as you're coming down down off the ridge on I-40, and right before you make that bend that puts you down in the crab orchard, if you look up to your right, there's a big table rock up there. That's Spencer's Rock. I took a group of teenagers one time and we hiked up there and made a picture on top of Spencer's Rock. But now you can only see it in wintertime when the leaves are off the trees. But that's one of the people that that met their fate because of that. Indians wanting people to pay tribute when they were traveling without paying the tribute. By the way, Bigfoot Spencer also spent the winter down at French Lick in a holler sycamore tree. They call him Bigfoot because he was a big man at the time, and they could see his prints. But
hey,
he lost his life.
Oh, sorry, David.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Talk a little bit about, you said the Yuchi were in this region, were in this area. Talk a little bit about settlement, European settlers, the first European settlers that came into like Anderson County, and what kind of conflict was there or kind of resolution?
The Cavett Station is probably the most famous of the Indian raids. The family was pretty well massacred by Indians.
And where was that?
Cavett Station is in West Knoxville.
Okay.
In fact, there's, I think, a group of apartments called Cavett Station Apartments.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there were probably a dozen or more serious Indian raids. And they weren't the Indians that really started it particularly, although it's hard to say who started the hostilities. They started long before because of the difference of opinion of declaring land your own because you discovered it. But the basic issue was overland, and the Indians would resist and tell people, most encounters weren't bloody. The Indians would just run the settlers off. But when you're fired upon, you fire back. And the earliest probably bloodshed that you can document is, and I can't think of his name at the moment, Major somebody, it's not going to come to me.
It's okay.
Attacked Talentiski's town in Harriman in the Emery Gap. That's where Talentiski's town was originally. After it was burned by this major, he moved it to Rockwood area. But the Emory Road is named for a William Emery, who was one of the men that fought with the major to drive Talentiski off Bernie's town in 1779. William Emery was thrown off his horse in the middle of the river, and all the accoutrements he had, his weapons and his powder and everything, weighed him down and he drowned. And that's why they named the Emery River the Emery River, after William Emery.
Huh.
I did not know that. That's good. I did not know that.
That is documented in history fairly strongly. There's several reports of it, and certainly it echoes the same story for the Clinch River, which was originally
Tell us
Mississippi
the
River.
story about the Irishman that said clinch me. Is that the story you're going to tell?
Well, this happened, of course, way up in Virginia. A man named Clinch is reputed to have died up there. There are alternative stories that say he yelled out, clinch me," as he was drowning. There is very little documentation for any of these oral traditions.
I've seen the documentation, and you're right. It's very sketchy about the Irishman that fell off his horse and reached up and said, clinch me," and they named the river after him. Now, what you just mentioned about the person named Clinch having died, that's news to me as well.
Well,
But
there is some
I've told that other
documentation.
story a lot. Go ahead.
There is some documentation that there was a Clinch family up there. So whether any of it's true, the Emory story is probably 90% verified.
Right.
The
I
original
agree.
name Pellissippi has just been determined. I had a small hand in that, but a group, a lady at Pellissippi and her supporters decided they wanted to know where the Pellissippi State College name came from. And so they came to me and I told them all I knew, which wasn't much, that I could render it into Yuchi, but I wasn't very convinced about that. And so I sent her off to an expert of the Algonquin languages, and he was able to pin it down that it originally applied to the Ohio River, and that Pellissippi meant River of the Maspelia, which is a group of Siouan peoples that lived up in the West Virginia area. Same thing for the original name of the Emery River. It originally was named the Babahatchee. Baba means paint in Yuchi, and Hatchie means river in Kosadi. This is just one of an example of a lot of mixed etymology terms. Another one would be the original town Coffitahachie in the Carolinas, where the princess was picked up and enslaved going north with the DeSoto expedition. Again, it's a mixed etymology word meaning river of the dogwood. Dogwood being in Yuchi and river being in a Creek language again. So
now, several years ago, I did some research on the word Pellissippi, and I reached out to the Smithsonian and asked for help there, and they determined, just as you have, that it was Algonquin in origin. And so it's good to see that early research I did way back in the 70s, probably 1970, that you've confirmed what we had learned back then. And now that's back when we were just thinking about, I mean, they didn't have Pellissippi Parkway back then yet, but they were beginning to wonder about that word even then.
now the Boy Scouts.
One more. What do you think about Mississippi?
It's Algonquin too.
All right, there you go. You got it.
And that's why there's similarity.
Yeah.
The words is of course, as an ethno-historian, my focus is on ethnology as much as history. And of course, one of the key ideas that can be used for historic research here is all these fossil words that are names for landmarks such as Pellissippi. And one of my favorites is Unica, the Unica Mountains. Unega in Yuchi means great rattlesnake. And the Yuchi Indians all had gorgets that they wore that had rattlesnakes engraved on them. They worshiped the rattlesnake, partly because they would go into caves and they'd carry snakes in with them, be bitten, and they'd have vision quests. And so
I bet they would. I bet they would.
It's a harsh way to do it, but
I know.
it worked.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of words here in Tennessee. Tennessee itself, of course.
Yep.
It's the one Yuchi word that all Tennesseans know. Tana means brother in Yuchi, and sea means water.
Huh.
So brother waters is the confluence of streams, where two streams come together.
Sure.
And the term still is used in Yuchi, meaning meeting place. Because when two parties would go out hunting and they'd break up to go different routes, they'd come back down two streams and meet where the streams met. And of course, if you get lost in the woods, that's what they tell you to do still. Find a stream and follow it down.
David, let me ask you, in Anderson County, do you know what was the first major settlement, of Europeans in Anderson County?
It would have been Burrville, Clinton.
Okay.
That is the first one that's listed there. Before it was made the county seat, it was just rural areas with lots of scattered cabins like Friel's Bend cabin is today.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't know of any community before Burrville.
Okay.
And Burrville was established in 1801 when the county was set up.
Okay. All right. Ray, you got anything to ask?
Oh, no, this has been a fun, I told you we were going to have a fun time with David.
Sure.
And he's an amazing individual with lots of knowledge, and I'm glad we were able to have him on today.
We need to have him back sometime and do a whole show just on the geology of the area, because I know he's an expert on that as well. So,
Yeah.
David,
maybe after the pandemic here, we can do it on the fly and actually go to some sites where some of these fossils are.
that'd be pretty great.
Let's do that. Let's remember, after we get to where we can do it, let's take us on the road. Keith.
Yep. Okay, we could do that. Well, David, thank you so much for spending time with us today, shedding a little bit of light on what we consider the prehistory of the region and of the area. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Sure. Ray, we've got another show coming up in a couple of weeks. Why don't you give us a little sneak preview of what that's going to consist of?
Well, we have invited Carolyn Evans to join us at our next show. And Carolyn it has the connection, she's the connection to the Oak Ridge Neighbors magazine. And I've been fortunate enough to write for that magazine for a number of months. It's a monthly magazine that comes out focusing on Oak Ridge. And we'll have Carolyn on to talk a little bit about the connection and the importance of including history in magazines such as the Oak Ridge Neighbors.
That sounds great. Ray, I just want to mention to folks that a lot of folks see this on our Facebook pages, my Facebook page. This morning, I came across something, and it was a 4-minute piece that I digitized and posted it on my Facebook page. And it was on June 16th, 2005, we had the world premiere of Secret City, the Oak Ridge Story, The War Years, as a part of the opening festivities of the Secret City Festival that year. And we had a wonderful evening, and a film crew from Y12 came and documented that opening. They put together a little 4-minute piece. Well, I found that today on a DVD, and I digitized it, and I put it on the Facebook page, just to kind of a throwback on my Facebook page. And I also put a link to the complete film, Secret City, the Oak Ridge Story, The War Years, that now lives on, PBS, East Tennessee PBS. It lives there. But if people are interested, and if they weren't around or they've not seen that film, they can go to my Facebook page and they'll see the link there. And
well, good. Yeah. thank you for putting that up. I think I well remember that event, and also that Y12 filmed it, but I did not have a copy of that, so I'm glad you have it. And get that link to the Secret City story of Oak Ridge. That's good. And I'll not take a lot of time about this, but it's something that I do routinely. For example, it's on Y12's website as well, and I use that link. But in fact, I put it up there before I retired. But what I did just a couple of weeks ago with Texas A&M University is they asked if I could come and talk about Oak Ridge history through Zoom, and I agreed and told them, I said, before I do that, let me give you this link for to have your students watch. And they did. They watched that story, that video, or documentary film that you produced. And after that, then I went on and made that presentation, standard presentation I make about the history of Oak Ridge. And I do that when I've got people coming, tourists coming to Oak Ridge. We give them the link before they come and tell them to watch that. And it's amazing. I can tell the difference when tourists come in that have seen that story. They have really good questions. And we get over a lot of the misunderstandings by having them I've already seen that documentary film. So that's great. I'm glad you put it out there. I'll go find it and share it as well on my Facebook page.
All right. Okay. Ray, David, thank you all so much. And folks, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.